What I'm going to talk to you about today are the cognitive abilities of human beings and why some things are just so darn hard for human beings. Often we talk about that you should follow guidelines and that it should have good usability and all these. UX has caught on. UX is a buzzword. UX is a buzz theme these days. But what we usually don't get around to talking about is, why is it that hard? Why are some things just hard-coded into the human brain, and why can we not work around that? And that's some of the things I'm going to talk to you about today, because if you know why, then you also know how to work around it in your software and not make the user work harder. A little bit about me. I am a software engineer. I graduated from Aalborg University in 2003. And after that, I went on to become a researcher there. That went quite well, meaning that about a year later, I was offered a scholarship for a PhD, which I finished in 2009. Went on to become a researcher again, and then at some point, 3 years ago nearly, I got to Trifork. That meant I actually got to try out some of all that heavy theoretical stuff I'd been doing at university to see if it actually worked in the real world, and I'm pleased to say it actually does, so that's great. Today's topics, we're going to talk about a guy named Miller. We're also going to talk about how a panda becomes a panda, and we're going to talk a bit about screwdrivers. That might make some more sense later on, but those are just some of the things we'll be talking about today. I bet all of you have tried at some point that you get a message on your answering machine, you call it up and somebody has left a number on there that you should call back to, and you start memorizing it, 98, 57, 30, 28, 98, 57, 30, 28, and then you pass a window with donuts. I could eat one of those. They got 4 on offer. I'm going to get some of those on my way back from work. What was that number again? And it's gone. It's just gone. And there's no way you can recall it. So you got to call up to your answering machine again, hear the message again to get the number, and then maybe you get it right if you can remember it from the time you hang up on your answering machine to actually punch it into your keyboard. That's how bad human cognitive abilities are, and memory. That brings me to Miller's law. That was the guy Miller I was going to talk about. 7 plus minus 2 means the amount of items a human being is able to hold in their short-term memory. Some are able to hold 5, some are able to hold 9, thus the 7 plus minus 2. If you want to be able to target all of your users, go for 5. Don't go for 9. And what is a meaningful item? Well, a meaningful item could be just one single digit. It could be a word. It could be a 3-digit number. It depends. If you have a telephone number, in Denmark, that's usually made out of 4 meaningful items. So 2 numbers, 2 numbers, 2 numbers, and 2 numbers. They've actually reduced that to 3 in some cases, especially with easy to remember business numbers, where they have 2 digits, 3 digits, 3 digits. Then you're down to 3 items. So it basically means what you remember as a single item rather than several items. Your short-term memory, how long is it? Any guesses? Short-term memory is only a few seconds long. That usually surprises people. People think it's like 30 seconds, maybe a minute. It's a few seconds long. And that's if you don't get interrupted. That's if you actually are concentrated about what you're supposed to remember. If you get interrupted, it's even worse. Hence the donut story. So short-term memory is very, very precious to us and should not be overloaded. Because if we do, people won't be able to cope with it. 7 plus minus 2 comes from the psychology world, and it has been misused in the UX field for many very weird rules, such as the number of menu points you should have in a menu. Why does that not make sense to have 7 plus minus 2 menu points? Why would you have to hold a full menu in your short-term memory? You don't. It's right in front of you. You can just read it. Why is it not completely off, though? Because when you have a menu folded out and you're supposed to make a choice in that menu about what point to take, you have to be able to remember the others to actually know which one is the closest to what you're looking for. So if you have, let's just go overboard and say a menu of 30 points, how do you get an overview of that? You don't. So it's not supposed to be used for something like that. It is at most a rule of thumb. But it's a good thing to remember that short-term memory is a precious and very limited resource. So treat it as such. What do you see here? Are they ordered in some way? Grouped? How? 2, 2, 2, and 1? Yeah. Now what do you see? Code. Yeah, that's what I expected from this room. What do you see? A syntax error. Yeah. Some people see square parentheses. And now what's weird compared to before is that here the single was on the right. Here the single is on the left. Why is that? Why does that happen? What's going on up here? We're looking for connections, yeah. What we're looking into here is the effect of something called Gestalt principles. Anyone heard of them? Quite a few. There's quite a few of them, I think 9 or something like that. I'm only going to go through the most common 4. And the first one is proximity. Proximity states that things that are close together, we expect to belong together in some way. Things that are far apart, we expect to have nothing to do with each other. This means that in this case, we have a group up here of 12 dots. Then we have a group here of another 12 dots. Or we might actually have 3 groups of 4 dots. They are slightly closer together than these, so they might have more to do with each other than those. And up here we have 2 groups of 6, or a group of 12 compared to these 2. I don't think there's anyone in this room who saw this and thought there's 36 dots there. Am I right? Yeah. We group things. We don't think about it, but we group things. The second one, similarity. If things look the same, we expect them to be the same. If things look differently, we expect them to be different. That means if up here you've got some dots that are differently colored, you expect those dots to stand out. And they do. Here, it's not the color, it's the shape instead, but they stand out. So if something stands out in a crowd, we expect it to be different in some way. Continuity. This is also just a bunch of dots, and yet again it's not, because I think everybody in this room sees this. That's continuity. We tend to draw a line where there is none, if we can. And we're not conscious of this, but we do this all the time. I'm going to get back to some examples on all of this. And the last one of the 4 is called closure. This is actually just a bent line, but most will see it as a circle, because they will automatically close the gap in the top and make a circle. This is something we do. We complete things that are incomplete, and we do this subconsciously. All right, these are the 4 main principles. I'm going to run through a few examples. This is a French website. I've chosen a French one because then you won't get caught up in reading, most of you, because there won't be that many French people. It's from a car insurance company. What is the first thought when you see this website? A mess. Chaos. Yeah, agreed. But why is that? Why is it a mess? I mean, it's got nice squared fields here, nice square field here. Why is it a mess? It's difficult to group, because if you start grouping these, then you get groups like this. Basically, all of the entire website is one group, because there's nothing separating any of it from each other. And then you end up seeing it as one group, and it gets to be such a large group that you can't overview it, and then you get back to the 7 plus minus 2. You don't have to keep this in short-term memory, but because there's so many things grouped together all in one group, you can't get an overview, and that's why you consider it messy. This is another example of groups that have gone wrong. Because here you have a label, then you have a text field, and then you have a call it? The text. Description, yeah, you have a description underneath. And that's fine. And then when you move down, you have another label, another text field, another description, another label, so on and so forth. But if you jump straight into the middle, what belongs together here? This one, this one, this one, or this one, this one, this one, or why is that? It's not grouped. It just comes all with the same white space in between all of them. It's not grouped because they should be grouped in threes, but they're not. And because they aren't, you don't actually follow what groups there are. There are two ways of grouping. This is from Jyske Bank's iPad app. One way is through boxes or lines. And this is probably from a graphical design point of view, the old-fashioned way of doing it. The other way of doing it is through white space. No lines on that one, but nobody in here has any doubt that this area all belongs together. This belongs together. This belongs together. White space is overrated. And I very often see it, and I'm looking at you developers, I very often see it when you guys are coding that, oh, but there's room over here, so I'll just fit it in here. And that's how an interface gets crammed. And that's why white space is a lot more important than you think it is. It's a way of grouping things. It's a way of creating order in chaos. So use it wisely. And don't just think that, oh, I'll just inst this 2 pixels further up and 2 pixels further up, and then I could just fit this in at the bottom. Because at some point, you get to the point where the pixels in between are so few that they don't work as grouping anymore. All right, similarity. This is from a website where they did a usability test, and they found out that people couldn't find their account information. The reason for this, they found out, was that these here have got nothing to do with account information. This one does. They thought all of these 5 belonged together. Why is that? Same color? Exactly. That means that you can have a usability problem in a website and an easy fix just like this. As soon as they did this, people had no problem finding their information anymore. Because they started looking out here because they realized it's not part of what is in the middle. It doesn't belong with them. It has a different color. That's all it took to solve a problem like that. Similarity. It's also what makes us able to scan through a page like this and find out what has gone into my account, what has gone out of my account. In this case, a lot has gone out of my account. But you would have green numbers. Same here when you're looking at an overview of stocks. You can easily see which indexes are in plus and which indexes are in minus right now. Why would I not just remove the plus and minus then if I've got green and red? Color blindness. Okay, I'm glad that more and more answer that when I ask, because it's actually quite a lot that are colorblind, and you can never have only one way of distinguishing. You can never only use color as the way of distinguishing items that otherwise look alike, because some people won't be able to. So always have 2 ways of distinguishing things. But this is very easily scannable when you have a difference like that, because they stand out. Continuity. This website is not something I would recommend otherwise, but it was just a very good example of continuity. It's got a very weird build, but that's how it is. I don't know why they have this banner across the website, but they do. And it just goes to illustrate continuity very, very well, because you have this blue menu or whatever it is over here. And because it's got the same width as down here, the same colors down here, the same font size, everything about these 2 parts of the website are alike. Because of this, we automatically think, okay, it's the same menu, it's just this one on top. There's nothing on top, it's pixels. But why do we think it's on top? Because that's what it looks like in the real world. Whenever we look at our desk and we've got piles of paper, whenever a corner is sticking out, we know fully well that's not the whole paper sticking out there. We know there's more underneath. It's just hidden because things are 3D. Things aren't 3D on a website, but we can fool people and use 3D as a way of making things belong together. Because that blue thing, that doesn't run behind this ribbon. There's nothing behind this ribbon. It's pixels. But because we can make the link to the real world and the 3D and the way of seeing things in the real world, we can make people see that these two belong together. Because people make the continuity of that. That's also why we recognize this as 5 rings. It's not really. But we make the continuity and say, okay, the red ring is above the green ring here, and then it goes below the green ring here. No, it doesn't. It's pixels. But it would if it was 5 physical rings that were tied together like this. And that way we use what people already know and have known for eternity and use it online. Same with iPads. We have all of these pop-up boxes on there. And by simple use of shadow and the fact that you can actually see the screen behind it, around it, you know that this is just something that's on top. It's really not, but it looks like it's on top. That means you can take it away again and be back where you were. What do you see? Triangles? How many? 2? What else? 3 circles? Yeah, that's the thing. You don't see 2 triangles and 3 circles. You see 3 crocodile thingies and 3 Pac-Man, because that's what there really is. But everybody in here see two triangles and 3 circles, because we make closure. We very quickly see that this is on a straight line, so we make that straight line mentally. And because there's a straight line there, that means that that white triangle is lying on top of another triangle. It's really not, because again, it's just pixels, but that's what we see. Same with this one. It looks like crudely made pie charts, but everybody sees the 3D square in there. Again, because we're making closure. We make the lines that aren't there. And this can actually be used. These all use closure. Every single one of them. This would just be a bunch of white lines otherwise. This one would never be a peacock if we weren't able to do closure around the actual head and neck of the peacock. HP's logo would just be 4 straight lines. We use it everywhere and we don't think about it. I think it's actually harder for us mentally to not close these lines than to actually do it. All right. Back to where a panda becomes a panda. Why is this not a panda? It is pixels, but there's nothing behind it or above it, so that's not why this time. It's not a panda, because if it was, there would be a gap here. But you didn't think of that gap because you did this. And that's why it becomes not only a lot of black blotches, but an actual panda. This is a funny little thing, because there's some things that we are taught through life that then overrules some of these things, such as reading. Everybody in here can read. Because of that, they see this and say, oh, it says FedEx. If you ask children who can't yet read what they see this arrow. That's because they are doing closure and saying, okay, this is actually the only thing that makes sense to them. The rest is just lines. All right, how is this useful? Fine if we're making logos, but not everybody here is making logos. In fact, most of us are probably not. Well, it's useful because we can use the fact that something is incomplete to our advantage. How do we know that this is a folded newspaper? Yeah, there's a shadow, that's true. But the fact that the text is cut off, you can see the top of a lot of letters in a line here. This picture does not make sense as a full picture. It's an incomplete picture. Same here, you can see the top of some letters there. That's how we know that this is a folded newspaper. We would know in other ways as well in the physical world, because it would be thicker, it would cast shadow, and so on and so forth. But if we transfer this to online, then we don't have all of the physical abilities from the physical newspaper. But we still have what we had with the folding. Here, you're fully aware now that there must be more further down. There must be a scroll bar somewhere. Otherwise, this would not be complete. This picture wouldn't make sense otherwise. And the thing about it is that if you're making a website and you have more than just what will fit on the first page, and you have to have a scroll bar, I've seen some very unfortunate cases where you could draw a straight line somewhere, and in the wrong resolution of a screen, that would just fit, and people would never realize that there was more further down. And the problem with that is we can never really predict people's resolution on their screen, because there's so many different screen resolutions. So the way to do it is make sure that nowhere on your site do you have a line that goes all the way through. If you don't have that, then always something will be cut off, being incomplete, making people look for closure, realizing that there's scroll on your site. So having something incomplete requiring closure is a way of making users aware that there's more. And we do it quite a lot. This is from the Windows Phone 7, and they use it quite frequently, or they use it as a regular thing on the phone, because on iPhone, if you have swipe somewhere, the archetypical way of illustrating that is through the small dots at the bottom. But those are often in the way, and there might be other and more subtle ways of showing it. This could be one, because everybody will see this and say, wait a minute, that's not full words, that's not even full letters. There must be more, because that, maybe somebody is not good at coding, but they can't be that bad. That requires people to start doing this, because they want to see what is missing here, and they want to see if they can pull that in. And there you go. That's swipe for you. This is also from Jyske Bank's iPad app. And they actually also made use of it, because they have this whole coffee shop branding thing going, where they have this bookshelf with all sorts of stuff on it. And then they have things over here that you're able to customize yourself. And again, they could just have made the bookshelf go to here. But because it stops here, and you can see this a little something here, I'm not quite sure what it is. That will require people to start seeing if they can move the bookcase, and then revealing that there's actually more behind there. Because they realize, okay, this tiny edge here is probably not all there's supposed to be, and they will look for closure. All right, that was Gestalt principles. The four most important ones. There are more to be looked at, but those are the four most important ones. There's also a principle called affordance. Affordance, the definition of affordance is visual assessment of intended use. Meaning that you're able to look at something and immediately realize how it's supposed to be used, just by looking at it. How many of you can hand on heart say that that's how it is with your software? How's this supposed to be used? And if we put historical things aside and what you've learned through your childhood, if you've never encountered a football before, what would make you realize how this is used? The shape? It can roll. It's round. What about the size? What does that say? It's too big for a hand. unless you've got really big hands. It's perfect for your feet, because your feet are less accurate. And the material and the texture, the way it can actually be compressed, makes it perfect for kicking, because it can go really far, and it doesn't hurt your foot. I could put a rock on that picture and you probably wouldn't start kicking it. Why? Because you know it would hurt. You know it would be heavy. That's the things you can see from immediately looking at things. This one. Why is that not the same? It's too small. And you have to be a really good football player to actually be able to dribble and score with that one. So that's perfect for what instead? Hands. It fits straight in your palm. It's got the perfect size for that. Scissors. Even without having used one of these, it's quite easy to see how that fits with your hand. And how you can go like this. And that's also very obvious when you give that to a left-handed person, because that makes it very difficult. And that's where affordance goes wrong. This one, you can't do anything else but press it. It won't do anything else whatsoever, except being pressed on. All right, that was fairly obvious. These are everyday things, you've all encountered them. Why is that so difficult? Why is affordance such a big deal? I'll show you why it's a big deal. Because when it's missing, that's when we start faltering. This is obviously a chair. What is characteristic of a chair? You can rest your back. It's stable. It's got a seat. And even more so, the height of the chair usually fits from your knee down to your heel. The seat of the chair usually fits from your knee to your back, and the back fits with the back of the chair. It fits perfectly with your body size. It's made for sitting. And it's easily recognizable as something to sit on. Is this a chair? Probably, but people are saying probably a lot around here. Why is that? Why are we not certain this is a chair or not a chair? Yeah, exactly. There's certain things about it that looks like a chair. It has somewhat of a seat. It has legs, but we're not entirely sure if it's stable. I'm not sure at all, actually. And it does have a back, but it's very inconvenient for my head. So if you see this in a museum, I would not be sure if I could sit on it or if I would get chased out for messing with a precious artifact of some sort. That's what happens when affordance is missing. We can't immediately tell from looking at it what it's for. This one, also fairly obvious. It's got two knobs. You can turn them. Water comes out. Yay. Clean hands. This one. How do I turn that on? Kick it, shout at it. Yeah, that's usually what people resort to. Maybe that can turn. I don't know. But even if that can turn and I get water, how do I get hot water? And how do I get cold water? I'm not sure. I bet everyone in this room at some point has stood around looking like a fool in front of a tap they couldn't operate. Is that all right? That's what happens when affordance is missing. You can't tell how to use it. This, a pepper mill. Household thing. This, I thought it was a decoration on the restaurant table I was sitting at. And I asked the waiter for pepper and salt. She said, it's right there. Oh. Because it doesn't look like it. And even if I had realized it was a pepper and salt mill, try twisting those with greasy hands in your kitchen. That won't happen. All right, that's affordance. That's when you can see what it's for when looking at it. Perceived affordance is visual assessment of possible use. That means you can actually use a lot of things for what it's not intended for. Other possible uses. A hammer, used for hitting nails. If we have a hammer we need hitting, and we don't have a hammer, or if we have a nail that needs hitting and we don't have a hammer, what do we look for? Yeah, similar. What is similar? Stone? iPad. You will never borrow my iPad. What do we look for? What is a good replacement item? And why? Something heavy and hard. Long, maybe? But could be a stone, so it doesn't necessarily have to be long. That means you won't get very many credit points from your mother-in-law when you use those. But they will do. How many times have we stood around and had a screw come undone somewhere and not had a screwdriver, and what do we look for? A knife, yes. Key I don't have, but I'm looking at the girls in the room. What do we look for? Yep. It's classical. Why? Because it has all of the same characteristics as what we would essentially use if we had it. It has a thin, sharp edge that's hard enough to get a grip. And that's basically it. These aren't nearly as good. This is the preferred tool if we have it, but it'll do in a jiff. When you have a hammer, then what? Everything looks like a nail. Yeah. When you have a bottle and you don't have a bottle opener, then that, or that, or that. And if you're really good, you start looking at a loaf of bread or a newspaper. But then you're good. And why do we not usually go for those first? Because a loaf of bread and a bottle opener does not have very many common characteristics. If it has, you left your bread out too late, too long. All right, so adapted use. We have things that are meant to be used in a certain way, and over time, we adapt the usage of them more to our liking. A book is primarily for reading, but we use it for shelter if we don't have anything else. We use it to stabilize a table. We use it to sit on or stand on if we can't reach. These are adapted uses, and they're perfectly fine because it's perceived affordance. It's something that's possible. It's not intended for that, but it's possible. And as long as we don't break it, we are usually more than happy to use it this way. Sometimes perceived affordance becomes affordance, the actual affordance. Everybody in this room has got tons of these around their office. But recent years, because we sit down as much as we do, which we shouldn't, right, Aino? We see more and more of these around the office. They look weird in the office. Where are they supposed to go? They're supposed to be in the gym. What are they doing in the office? And then somebody came up with this. That completely defeats the purpose of it not being good at sitting on. And the reason they've come up with this is because somebody complained at some point that a ball like that, whenever people go to lunch, if you're in a crooked building, all the balls are at the end of the hallway when you come back from lunch. Because they won't stand still wherever they are. So let's put some wheels, let's put a ring around it so it doesn't roll. But if it doesn't roll, then that becomes impractical. So let's put wheels on it. And then, yeah, I would really like to lean back a bit because it's really hard on my back to sit on a ball like that. And then you put a backrest on it, completely defeating the purpose. Then you might as well go back to your normal office chair. But hey, that's humans for you. How many can say they haven't been there? Everybody has done this. Why is that? Why is that? Huh? The reason it normally happens is because some brilliant designer, sometime in time, came up with the idea that symmetry is a good thing, meaning a door should look the exact same way on both sides, leaving us no clue whether it opens inwards or outwards. Hence this. Then somebody came up with the idea, we put labels on it. That solves it. That'll solve it. Won't it? Why not? Why does that usually not solve it? Exactly. We don't read that. And if we do, we read it too late and our hand has already pushed or pulled. All right. Then what's the solution? Bigger labels. Yeah, because labels work the first time, right? No, not bigger labels. This would do it. There's no way you can pull that door, and there's no way you can push that door. Or that handle, at least. Why don't we do that, then? Symmetry. Yeah. And aesthetics. I'm sure some designer will tell you that doesn't look good. I tend to agree, but it would solve the problem. All right, but how is this relevant in software? Well, we have a lot of these around our software. Buttons. This is a regular button. This is a chosen button, meaning if you press return, then it activates. This is a button that's pressed in. This is an inactive button. We run across those all the time, and if they're done right, they work as intended. What if they all look like that? You can't even tell that that's a button. It might as well be a text field. That means in software, you can look at stuff and actually tell how it's supposed to be used. Is it clickable? Can you interact with it? Or is it just text? That helps us. Clues like that helps us in software as well. If we can look at it and tell how it's supposed to be used. That's why we draw from the real world and start using 3D effects of all sorts, is to actually give clues as to how it's supposed to be used. This is taken from Danske Bank's iPad app and Jyske Bank's iPad app, and it's just to illustrate, it doesn't have to be exactly like the physical world. I mean, this is felt sewn onto paper, and I mean, it doesn't get much more real worldish than that. But it might also just be something like this. This has got enough of the characteristica. It doesn't have the actual materials of the real world, but it has the characteristica. It looks like something you can pull on. Same here. This has got wood on there and taped up pieces of paper, and it looks like there's a pocket there where they will actually fit inside. So that's very, very much real world. But again, here's the effect that does the trick. The shadow that makes it look like it comes from underneath, and there's more to be pulled from there. It doesn't actually look like the real world. It doesn't look like paper. It doesn't look like felt. It doesn't look like all that. But it does have the effect that gives us a hint that there's more there. And also this one. I'm quite sure if you take the shelves off this bookshelf, these won't fall down. They would in the real world, hence the need for shelves. But they won't on an iPad. Meaning, you might as well have them floating. That was what I had for you guys. Because if you go into color blindness, it's quite complex because there is the most common one is green-red colorblind, but you can be blue-red and green-blue as well. And there's a very, very, very rare one called black and white colorblind. And if you want to be absolutely sure with your palette that you don't run into trouble, make sure you always have some other way of hinting something other than just color. Just like I showed you with the index where you have a plus and minus in front. No matter what colors you choose, that won't be a problem because whoever is colorblind can just refer to the plus and minus instead. So make sure that you always hint stuff with others than just colors. If you really want to look into color blindness, look it up. There are simulators on the internet that will show you how different colors are shown for various types of color blindness. So there's a lot to be done in that way. UX is quite a big field. There's a reason I've been speaking here a ton of times by now. And do courses and stuff. And usually the books that say they have all of it, they only scratch the surface in all of it. So it basically depends on what you need. Are you looking for interaction design? Then I would go for Jenny Priest's interaction design book. If you're looking for usability tests, then I would go for Jeffrey Rubin's handbook on usability tests. If you are looking into doing web forms, I would look at Luke Bobrowski's web form book, and so on and so forth. There are books on eye tracking. There's books on virtually any of the topics I've covered here and in all my other talks. So it depends on what you are in specific need of. I would rather get a specialized book than a generalized book. Regarding buttons no longer looking like buttons, and I was talking about it with Jyske Bank and the felt and paper and all that, all of this where it looks like the real world, very much like chrome and wood and that sort of thing, is called skeuomorphism. Skeuomorphism was important in the beginning of the digital ages because people had to relate it to something they knew, because they weren't very familiar with computers and all things digital. But by now, the digital age has gone so far that many of us have grown up with digital items, and you don't necessarily anymore need the link to the real world to know how it works, because you've been around since you were young. And that's why Microsoft, when they launched the new design principles for WP7, they had one principle that said authentically digital. And that meant that you had to be authentic to the digital world rather than the physical world, because the digital world is now mature enough to stand on its own 2 feet rather than always being related to the 3D physical world. So that's why. And I think it actually can work to not have the direct link to the real world. You should still be able to see what you can interact with, but it doesn't necessarily have to look like a radio button on a radio from 1950.